Have you ever set your heart on a house, made an offer, and the seller accepted it? You signed the contract and sent it to the seller, eagerly awaiting their signature. Are you already celebrating your new home? But what if during this waiting period, another buyer swoops in, offering a higher price or more straightforward terms, and the seller accepts their offer and signs the contract with them, only informing you after everything is finalized? Frustrating, right? This scenario is known in Australia as gazumping. If you want to avoid this happening to you, then you must watch this video to the end. I'll explain the offer and acceptance process and how to prevent gazumping in Perth, Brisbane, Melbourne, and Sydney, ensuring you secure the home you want. Hey there, my name is Alex. Welcome to my channel where I share information about real estate investment, economic trends, and wealth creation. If you like this video, smash the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to watch new weekly videos. Without further ado, let's get into it. Before we delve into the contract offer and acceptance processes in different states, it's crucial to understand gazumping. Gazumping occurs when a seller accepts your offer but then decides to sell to someone else. This depends on how your offer was accepted. If it is verbal, the seller can change their mind at any time. Even if accepted in writing through email or text, they can still change their mind. The safest form of acceptance is through a signed contract by the seller. Gazumping typically happens in the gap between the seller informally accepting an offer and the contract exchange. Each Australian state and territory has its own property transfer regulations, so the situation varies greatly. Let's start our exploration with Perth in Western Australia, known for its simple procedures, and move on to the more chaotic Sydney in New South Wales. In Perth, Western Australia, the offer and acceptance process when buying a house is quite unique. This process is named the Offer and Acceptance Contract, abbreviated as ONA. It encompasses the offer, acceptance, and contract signing in one streamlined procedure. The ONA consists of two written documents. The first is called the Contract for Sale of Land or Strata Title by Offer and Acceptance. Despite its lengthy name, it clearly outlines the main terms such as your offer for the property, the deposit amount, payment methods, your desired property settlement date, and any special or additional terms. The second document, the joint form of general conditions for the sale of land, acts like a buyer's guide, detailing general considerations and terms. The more critical document is of course the first one. Before sending it to the real estate agent, all information, including any terms you wish to add, must be filled in. Once you sign and send it to the agent, your formal offer is complete. Remember, an offer is not just about the price, it also involves various contractual terms. Therefore, it's best to verbally communicate with the agent beforehand to increase the likelihood of your offer being accepted. The first document also includes loan conditions. Unless the purchase is for an off-the-plan property or land, buyers generally retain the loan condition. If the loan is not approved, the buyer can withdraw from the contract without penalty, and any deposit paid to the seller must be fully refunded. However, there is an exception when buying a house or land package. If the buyer pays a deposit to the builder, say between $1,000 to $3,000, the builder generally does not refund it, especially if the buyer requested various design changes and then decides not to proceed with the purchase. So before paying the builder, make sure to get written confirmation of the refund conditions, whether it's a full or partial refund. In Perth, if a buyer is unsure, it is better not to make any deposit. Unlike other states where buyers might leave a deposit everywhere to secure every opportunity, Perth's buying process is very straightforward and it protects the buyer. Buyers can request the property's certificate of title from the agent. However, the responsibility of obtaining and reviewing this document, along with any related land use restrictions, lies with the buyer. This is different from the cities like Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane, where agents provide a contract pack with all relevant documents. This information can be checked on the Landgate website. If the property has a swimming pool, the buyer needs to check local council regulations for compliance. Issues related to the underground power and water connections also need separate inquiries. Once the agent reviews the ONA, the seller has three options. 1. Ignore it and sign a contract with someone else. 2. Make a counter-offer, making the new price and terms to be changed on the ONA and sending it back to the buyer, who can accept or continue negotiating until both parties agree on all terms. 3. The seller directly agrees, signs, and notifies the buyer that the offer has been accepted. As long as both parties are aware of each other's signature and each has a copy of the signed ONA, the sales contract is established and legally binding. In Perth, contracts typically don't include a cooling-off period, so it's generally accepted that once the seller signs, the deal is done. The offer and acceptance process in Perth is very simple and straightforward. Casual, non-serious buyers won't like it. Serious buyers make written offers, and once the seller accepts, the contract is binding. Both parties know that the indication of an accepted offer is the seller's signature, eliminating situations where a buyer thinks their offer is accepted, but the seller sells to someone else. And thus, gazumping is not a concern in Western Australia. However, the situation is much more complicated in the eastern Australian cities of Brisbane, Melbourne, and Sydney. In Brisbane, a house is not sold until the seller signs the contract and notifies the buyer. Before that, the house isn't sold and can be sold to someone else at any time. If a buyer has signed the contract but the seller hasn't, it merely indicates the buyer's willingness to purchase at a proposed price, namely an offer. In a hot property market, it's common for sellers to receive multiple offers from different buyers. Unlike other states where the process can be chaotic, Queensland elevates the handling of multiple offers to a formal level. If you're interested in a property that's receiving multiple offers and wish to make an offer, you need to fill out the REIQ Acknowledgement of Multiple Offers form. Some might find this overkill, but it's important to remember that the Australian way of right or wrong is based on fairness and ethics. For example, we might think, number one, a seller should only consider one offer at a time, on a first-come, first-served basis. Number two, if there's an offer, agents should notify all interested parties, giving them a chance to make a higher bid. Number three, if a seller verbally agrees to an offer, they shouldn't sign a contract with someone else. However, none of these so-called rules are followed in reality. Until the contract is finalized, agents and sellers can do whatever they want. You can complain, but it doesn't change anything because while unethical, the agent's and owner's behavior is perfectly legal. Queensland's approach aims to correct buyers' misconceptions and reduce complaints, hence the introduction of this form. It is a way to make the buyers acknowledge that they are in a multiple offer stage where anything can happen. Now in Queensland, apart from the public auctions, most house purchases involve this multiple offer scenario. Offers and conditions are clearly written, leaving little room for manipulation by agents and sellers. This reduces the likelihood of gazumping. After both parties sign the contract, unless previously waived, the buyer typically has a 5-day cooling-off period, during which they can withdraw without the seller being able to do the same. If the buyer withdraws, there is a penalty of 0.25% of the contract price, with the rest refunded. Like in Perth, unless the seller requests otherwise, contracts generally include a finance clause. If the loan isn't approved, the buyer can exit the contract. However, in a competitive market, insisting on a loan clause might mean missing out on the property. Brisbane's processes are more regulated and standardized, especially when compared with the more chaotic ways in Melbourne and Sydney. In Melbourne, the processes of offer and acceptance is quite unique. Residential property sale contracts in Victoria come with a 3-day cooling-off period. What's very important is that this cooling-off period starts from the day the buyer signs the contract, not the seller. During these 3 days, the buyer can choose to withdraw from the contract. The seller, on the other hand, can choose to ignore, accept, or wait for a higher offer from someone else. Whether a buyer gets gazumped depends on 2 things. 1, whether the agent verbally informed the buyer that their offer was accepted, and 2, who eventually buys the property. If the buyer was verbally told that the offer was accepted, but the property is sold to someone else, then the buyer is gazumped. In Victoria, while you can make a verbal offer, it's generally not taken seriously. A more effective approach is to make a formal offer by signing the contract. However, once you sign, the cooling-off period starts, and withdrawing from the contract after this point incurs a cost. The deal isn't truly yours until the seller signs and informs you of their acceptance. In Sydney, the situation is quite different and arguably more wild compared to the other states. Many agents require buyers to pay a holding deposit and fill out a personal details form as part of the expression of interest or EOI process. Completing the EOI gets you taken seriously by the agents. But note that neither party is obliged to proceed with the sale. It merely indicates an interest. Initial price and condition negotiations are usually verbal, and even a formal email doesn't hold legal weight. Likewise, a seller's verbal acceptance is not legally binding. After the seller accepts your offer and conditions, the agent sends you the contract. You and your solicitor go through it together, communicate with the seller's solicitor, and then sign it. Only after the seller signs the contract is the exchange complete. This process from verbal agreement to signing can take anywhere from 3 days to 3 weeks. During this time, the seller might consider other offers and side with someone else without informing you, making gazumping very common in Sydney. To counter this, interested buyers often request a contract upfront, allowing their solicitor to review it and confirm terms and conditions through the agent. making the signing of the contract a formal offer to shorten the process and reduce gazumping risks. However, the effectiveness of this strategy is questionable. Regardless of the state and territories, to ensure a property sale is final, generally 5 milestones must occur. Number 1, buyer signs the contract. Number 2, seller signs the contract. Number 3, parties tell each other their version of the contracts are signed and exchange the contracts. Number 4, payments of a 5 to 10% deposit. And number 5, contract is not subject to any conditions anymore. Namely, all conditions are met, like loan clauses, cooling off periods, FIRB approval, etc. Until these steps are completed, either the buyer or the seller can exit the contract. To avoid gazumping, do not take the verbal acceptance seriously. The real indicator of securing property is the seller signing the contract. Until then, anything can happen. If you made it this far, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and share this with your friend. Turn on the notification bell to watch new weekly videos, and have a good one. Bye-bye.